Jan, everyone. We welcome you to the third episode of Camo Conversations, and we are more than honored to join. We have been joined by Lt General Asit Mistry. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us at such a short notice, and it's definitely going to be one of the best episodes. And I'll now hand it over to my co-host Shivani, who will tell you about Camo Conversations.
It's an honor to have you, sir, here, and it's very helpful for the young generation, especially the defense aspirants, to know more about you. So, Chemo Conversation started with the idea that we want to make sure that we highlight the officers that they have worked on ground in different aspects of the defense and the experience that they hold so that they can share it with the young generation and that motivates on ground level that it's not just one way that you can contribute to the nation building, but there are multiple other ways. And STEM conversation started as an initiative just because we both thought that there are very many officers and that we can just bring them to a platform and let them speak about their experience because they have a lot to share. It's not one experience or two experiences, there are many experiences. So, in a little short span, when we have them on board, and we have had amazing reviews where they are like excited that who is going to be next on board. So, it's an honor to have you on board, sir.
Thank you, Shivani and Savni, for inviting me to Camo Conversations. It is indeed a great, pleasure and an honor to be on this show with you. And I hope that your viewers will benefit somewhat from my experiences, and it will give them some inspiration to join the armed forces. Thank you. Let's begin.
Yeah.
Definitely, sir. I'd now like to take this moment to formally introduce our guest for the day. It is a privilege for us to introduce our guest, Lt General Asit Mistry, sir, PVSM, AVSM, SM, VSM, and infantry officer of the Maratha Light Infantry. With a distinguished career spanning nearly 4 decades, Sir has served across a wide spectrum of operational and leadership roles. His experience ranges from the challenging terrains of Siachen and Dras to counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations in Jammu and Kashmir and Upper Assam. He has commanded multiple levels, including an infantry battalion in Siachen, a mountain brigade in Upper Assam, and Rifle Rifles Force in Kashmir. As a young officer, Sir also served with the National Security Guard, the elite Black Cat Commandos. Gaining early exposure to high intensity operations, Sir has represented India in UN peacekeeping missions, serving as a military observer in Liberia, later as a deputy force commander in South Sudan. In addition to his operational roles, Sir has made a significant contribution to training and leadership development, most notably as the Commandant of National Defense Academy, where he oversaw the training of nearly 2,000 cadets. He is a recipient of some of the nation's highest distinguished service awards, including the Pari Vishesh Seva Medal, Ati Vishesh Seva Medal, Sena Medal, and Vishesh Seva Medal. Sir, it is an absolute honor to have you with us today. Shivani, you can start
Thank
with your
you.
question.
Yes, sir. So I'll be diving right into it as I'm excited. So you began very early on as you joined Sainik School before you forged on to becoming a commissioned officer from NDA. What was the motivation behind to join the forces?
Well, I joined Sainik School at the age of 10. And in Sainik schools, you are mandated to take the ND entrance exam. And the whole environment there is designed to prepare you for entrance to the NDA. So, it became a matter of course that one took the NDA entrance exam, and then I was lucky to get through with my first chance. And I joined NDA at the age of 16 plus, way back in 1978. But, for a boy like me who hails from Gujarat, this was quite a rare thing because you don't see too many, at least in those days, we didn't see too many Gujaratis joining the armed forces. So in some way, I was kind of, treading on unbeaten paths.
Certainly, sir. I think that really makes a difference. That actually tells us that how an individual is motivated at such a young age and is just determined. I mean, most of us are still figuring ourselves out at that age, and you had your goal clear. So, my question to you is more related to the operations that you have undertaken. So, in counterinsurgency, beyond operations, there's also a question of understanding the mindset of how the insurgents function. So, from your experience in the valley, what do you think is the major driving force for them? What is the aim that they are undertaking in conducting these insurgencies?
See, in any counterinsurgency campaign, the people are the center of gravity. And the terrorists are those who are from the people, but have probably gone astray because they have been led that way. There are misunderstandings. The reasons could vary from places to places and region to region. But obviously, there are some who are misguided and they go. And in particular case of Kashmir, we have a neighbor who's been aiding and abetting this whole issue of separatism right since 47. And, they tried the conventional war, but they never succeeded. And then late 80s, they started this so-called asymmetric war or, sub-conventional conflict. And, part of their whole concept of death by 1,000 cuts. So they started motivating the youth of Kashmir and gave them all the false promises and narrative building and all that. So that motivated them. Now, what happens is during different stages of insurgency, there are different factors that motivate the terrorists. Always in most of the insurgency movement, you will find that in the initial part there is a fair bit of idealism. There's some kind of a cause to which they are there to, but gradually the cause starts getting chipped away because they realize that in most such cases that there is a lot of futility to the whole concept of whatever causes that they had, and more often than not the causes are actually fake ones, in the sense a false narrative has been created and then that motivates young people who are very impressionable and therefore they get carried away. So gradually the cause starts going away and then the criminal element actually starts usurping the movement. And then you reach a stage where there is a kind of a gun culture, a kind of romanticizing the youth who have picked up arms. That kind of stage comes in. And that again starts because even that kind of behavior is not accepted by the society. And without the support of the society, they cannot survive. So then, towards the tail end of the insurgency movement, you will find that there is more of crime surgency than actual insurgency. So it's largely crime and personal motivation, kind of gratification, kind of things that motivate people. So in a sense, it starts with a cause, mutates to a kind of a combination of cause, come a little bit of a romanticized image, for the youth, and then towards the third stage, it starts getting completely overtaken by crime and all the negative things. So these are, in my view, basically the causes that leads to insurgency. But to begin with, there would be some grievances. There would be some factors which would motivate people to pick up arms against their own state. So you need to address those issues. What has led to that. And once you start addressing them, as also when you start doing the kinetic operations to neutralize terrorists, a combination of both this, a people-friendly approach, addressing their genuine concerns, and at the same time, making sure that the law of the land is upheld, that anybody who's picked up arms against the nation, who's waging a war against the nation, is taken to task by the law at your disposal, and then ultimately we lead to a stage of solution. But you need a whole of government approach. You need a multi-dimensional approach. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible for viewers to understand. But it's a combination of factors that will lead to success in counterinsurgency.
Definitely, sir.
So my question is that you have lived in extreme conditions like the Siachen glaciers and Dral. Could you share any one experience that has stayed with you till date, like you remember that experience?
Well, there are lots of them. But one that always sticks in my mind, I mean, most prominently, is something that happened on the 2nd of March 2003 when I was commanding my battalion in Siachen. It was a Sunday, and the World Cup, Cricket World Cup, One Day World Cup was on that time. And unfortunately, that season, most of the snowfall of that winter came in a very late part of winter and came in a concentrated manner in the second half of February. And therefore, we had series of avalanches in end February and early March. And 2nd March was one such day where we had series of avalanches on the post where my battalion was deployed. So we had our first avalanche at about 7:30, which is unheard of. You don't expect avalanches at that early in the morning. But we had an avalanche at 7:30 on a post. Fortunately, we didn't lose any people, nor did we lose any substantial equipment. I mean, there was hardly any serious damage. Another avalanche came at about 1:30 in another locality. Because we are holding a vast frontage, almost something like 25 odd kilometers was the frontage that my battalion held. So within that, different companies were deployed at different areas. So the second avalanche came at 1:30 in another company location. Unfortunately, there we lost some porters because a bunker in which they were staying actually collapsed because of the avalanche. So while we managed to dig out and save about 8 of them, but 3 could not be saved. So we lost 3 porters there. And the worst was yet to unfold. And that avalanche came at around 10 o'clock at night. And that was again in a third company. And that was the worst one. And it was a staging post, place where people stay temporarily for acclimatization for going up to a higher post. So there was minimal infrastructure there. There was a fiberglass hut and a couple of tents where people were staying. And the entire fiberglass hut got buried. So about 12 people were inside. And there were 2 porters who were out of the fiberglass hut when the avalanche struck. So it is these 2 porters who broke the fiberglass hut and started pulling out people. About 6 people could be pulled out. The other 6 could not be. And then it took us next at least 3 days of continuous efforts to rescue those who had at least managed to come out and survive. And that led to very, very difficult and challenging rescue operations while snow blizzards were going on. In the process, the people who had gone out for rescue themselves got trapped in the snow blizzard. And I mean those 3-4 days in that March of 2003, I just cannot forget. And we had an officer called Captain Sachin Bali. He was leading the rescue efforts, and these rescue team themselves, because of the snow blizzard that they were caught in, suffered serious cold injuries. And then they had to be evacuated. And the situation was such that, the altitudes were such that the helicopter could pick up only one person at a time. So the helicopter used to shuttle, used to pick up one, bring him to the hospital or at least to the base and go back again. Captain Sachin Bali, who was the most grievously injured, should have been the first one to be evacuated by the principles of casualty evacuation. But he, being the officer, refused to be evacuated first. He said, let all men be evacuated, all soldiers be evacuated first. I would be the last to be evacuated. In the process, after 3 boys were evacuated, the weather packed up. and no further rescue was possible that evening. So he had to spend one more night in those, frozen heights with a serious call injury. And he could be evacuated only 24 hours later. In the process, he lost, 7 fingers. And very, very, very sad, this thing, but heroic, leadership that the officer displayed. So this particular incident, and, as the commanding officer, the weight of all such casualties rests on your head and your shoulders. I can never forget that particular incident or the whole chain of events related to 2nd of March 2003. But there are many more, some more pleasant ones. We had some very great firefights with the enemy across, and we literally, gave them hell. And we believed in a principle that a good battalion leaves its impressions at 2 places. One is the minds of the enemy that you face, and second is the place that you inhabit. So we ensured that the enemy never forgot us, because we psychologically and morally so dominated them with our fire. And we substantially improved the infrastructure in the place that the battalion was deployed, because this was an area that had been occupied immediately after Operation Vijay. So it was a relatively a newer sector of Siachen. So there was not enough infrastructure, both from defensive point of view and from habitability point of view. So we, my battalion did a great job in improving the habitat, besides giving a lesson to the enemy. So overall, it was a very satisfying tenure, despite the casualties that we saw.
Definitely. So I think this will be that one incident that everyone will be referring to after the podcast, something that everyone will have as a takeaway. So my next question
Yeah.
is that during your UN mission, I mean, everyone knows the ground realities of how situations are, how bad things actually are. But there's a lot of times there must have come a question of what should be done and what could be done because of the limited mandates of the United Nations Charter. So what is the biggest gap between this? And did you ever face such a dilemma? If yes, then how did you decide and how did you go ahead with that entire thing?
So I was in South Sudan in 2012, 13 until 2014, early 2014. Prior to that, I was in Liberia in 96, 97. So, firstly, at that time, the entire geopolitical situation, particularly in 90s, it was quite different. And even in the early part of the century, that is 12, 13, also the geopolitical situation was quite different. And therefore, from the politico-strategic level, the UN was not as powerless as it is today. So, let's not discuss the current, imbroglio as far as multilateralism and UN is concerned, because that is more to do with the international political situation, So we leave that part aside, but I will comment on the operational and the tactical aspects of peacekeeping challenges. And as you said, that you expected to do a lot, and there are challenges in terms of mandate and in terms of resources. So 96, 97, the Liberia mission that we were in was a purely an observer mission. So that was a little different, and it was a Chapter 8 mission. That means the peacekeeping force was actually being provided by the regional powers, and the UN was only doing a part of the job. That was basically we were doing in partnership with the regional, that was the ECOWAS countries, the Economic Community of West African States. They had contributed a peacekeeping force. So that was a different mission. There, our role was primarily and mainly only as military observers, and later on, we were also given additional role to be electoral observers. So we conducted the elections in 97. And in those elections, a man called Charles Taylor won the elections. And Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, who contested against him, who was a World Bank official, lost the elections. And thereafter, the mission was closed and we came back. And lo and behold, a couple of years, 3-4 years down the line, there was resurgence of civil war in Liberia. And again, a new peacekeeping mission in which a full-fledged UN peacekeeping force was deployed, was launched. Charles Taylor, of course, was then prosecuted in the International Court of Justice and was imprisoned and was convicted for human rights violations and war crimes and lots of other allegations. And it so happened that Ellen Sirleaf Johnson then became the president, and she was the president for 2 terms. So that was part of the history. But so there, our role was limited. But in terms of South Sudan, was a classic 21st century peacekeeping mission where a lot is expected and little resources are given. So the major challenge in the UN peacekeeping is essentially lack of resources vis-a-vis expectation. There is a complete mismatch. South Sudan is a huge country. It's got an area of about 600,000 square kilometers. And there were only 7 battalions authorized. So, on average, you can say about 1 battalion per 1 lakh square kilometers, because 1 battalion was meant to be in reserve. So you had only 6 battalions deployed. I mean, I'm just giving a sample mathematical calculation. All deployment is not based on such calculation, but it gives you an idea of the immense responsibility that you thrust on these very, very lightly armed peacekeepers. And then you expect them to do, very vigorous kind of peacekeeping mission. You're expecting them to do peace enforcement and robust peacekeeping. And in case of South Sudan, the major violations of the UN mandate or the protection of civilians was being endangered by the armed forces of South Sudan itself, the SPLA, the South Sudanese People's Liberation Army. And how do you fight the host nations' armed forces themselves with just 7 battalions, whereas the strength of the SPLA was something close to almost 200,000 troops? So there is this mismatch. And on the other hand, the expectations of the world, particularly the developed countries, are immense, endless. So there is a mismatch between expectations and resources provided. And then there are lots of tactical issues, there are logistic issues, there are insufficient resources for you to undertake movement, to undertake tactical operations. The assets, most of the mobility assets are shared with the civilian elements of the mission. The entire logistic support is under a person known as the Director of Mission Support, DMS, which is a purely civilian establishment. So even military logistic resources are placed under them, and these are to be shared among all elements of the mission. So, it is very difficult to undertake tactical operations when you do the allotment of resources based on bookkeeping and accounting and auditing kind of priorities vis-a-vis the operational priorities. So it's a very complex challenge. And the strategic challenge of how the Security Council today is hamstrung is an entirely different chapter. We will not go into that. That's quite beyond the scope of, I think, our discussion.
Yes, sir, definitely.
I would like to know more about your experience. Very early on, you became a team commander for the NSG. So, as the daughter of an NSG Black Kit commander, that was one thing that I always wanted to ask you. Like, what was your experience about the whole NSG camp and you working with them?
Since you are daughter of a Black Cat commando, I must ask, which unit was your father in?
So initially he was in ASC and then he went on to join NSG as a short tenure, but then he was a part of NSG.
So I was in the 51 SAG, which was the 51 Special Action Group, the first unit of the NSG that was to be raised in 85. And I was fortunate to have joined, almost not the first batch, but before the second batch came. So you can say I was 1.5 batch. I joined sometime in in July 88. So these were very early days of NSG.
Yes.
So we are still finding our feet, and while the role was, of course, very, very vast, saying counterterrorism, but it involved large number of activities, and entire creating a new establishment, new organization. So, well, great days. We learned a lot. It was trial by error and trial by fire, but it was one of the most enriching tenures of my life. There were, since being a very elite force and special force, the conventional restrictions did not apply. So there was a lot of freedom of action. So even as young officers, there was a lot of trust and confidence reposed in us. And you were expected to, live up to that trust and confidence that was reposed in you. In fact, if you remember, I don't know if you know this, but in those days, the posting to NSG was issued with a caveat: the posting in national interest, no representation accepted. So, it was great days. We did, lots of innovative training. We got the best of equipment that you could get in the world, and I think the force has really proved itself over the years.
Certainly, sir.
So my next question is that given the current geopolitical situation, including Israel, Iran, US, it seems like a full-fledged war is about to happen, but it does not really it isn't happening right now. So do you think at some point deliberate instability is kind of a strategic tool which is being used in the current geopolitical stance? And if yes, what could be its implications in the coming future?
Well, we are in a very, very complex situation. And, while I wouldn't call it the Third World War, but I would say the world is definitely at war. So, firstly, there are a large number of conflicts ongoing at the moment. If you take all kinds of, lower end of the spectrum, in the spectrum of conflict that are going on in various parts of the world, to the high intensity wars, two major wars that are going on, the Ukraine-Russia war and the Iran-US-Israel war. There are almost some 130 odd different sizes of conflicts ongoing at the moment. So, in effect, the world is at war. More so, the ongoing conflict in Iran impacts the whole world. Whatever may be the outcome, in fact, even before it is concluded, right now, the way energy supplies have been disrupted. And it's not only energy supplies, there are cascading effects. The fertilizer supplies are getting affected. There are some, helium and some gases required for, product of semiconductors. So there is a kind of a chain reaction. The world and the way the oil prices have changed, the way the gas prices have changed, has a cascading effect on the world economy as a whole. So it's a very complex situation. Now, there are lots of, geopolitical stories or theories being propounded as to why this conflict was started. Had the US and Israel succeeded in what should be their ultimate objective, whether they now disown it, but the fact is that the ultimate long and short of their purpose of their campaign was to have a regime change, because without regime change, everything else becomes meaningless. Degradation of the missile potential or the drone potential, degradation of their nuclear capability, degradation of their ability to undertake asymmetric warfare, or the excess of resistance, and those kind of operations. All these are means to an end. They are not ends in themselves. And unless they succeed in having a regime that is favorably disposed to US and at least not hostile to Israel, there is very little strategic achievements that they can accomplish. And if they succeed in doing that, then the entire Middle East would be reshaped. And if the entire Middle East is reshaped, probably it will also change, the entire world order. So, it will have an impact on the world order. So the potential of this campaign were tremendous had they succeeded. But it seems that while they had planned tactically very well, the art of operational art, is linking those tactical victories to produce a strategic impact. I think that seems to be a big gap. That how do you produce a strategic effect? And you keep doing the same thing again and again. You're just bombing and bombing and bombing, purely air power. There is a saying which says that if you keep doing the same thing again and again and expect a different outcome, you know what that is defined as. So I think the US has got stuck into, US and Israel have got stuck into this kind of a quagmire. Now they don't know how to break the jinx that they have landed into. Okay. So unless they take the next step, see, ideally, they should have had a second part of the campaign plan. They should have had some contacts with rebel leaders. They should have, propped up someone who would have been acceptable to the people. You don't want to put boots on ground. Yes, agreed. But you could have put sneakers on ground. You should have put sneakers on ground. Some light footprint, there are plenty of Iranian origin Americans today. So some of them could have been cultivated and trained and infiltrated to, unless you prepare the rebellion from people, unless you provide them the organizational and inspirational leadership, how do you bring about regime change? So that part doesn't seem to have been prepared. They just hoped that with the decapitation and the degradation of the war waging potential would lead to a collapse of the system and the rising of people. Neither of that has happened. On the contrary, Iran is becoming stronger by the day, strategically and politically. The so-called, the defensive campaign that they are launching is actually enabling them to survive. And as long as Iran does not lose the war, they win the war. And as long as the Americans and the Israelis don't win, they have lost the war. So it's a war for the Americans and the Israelis now to lose.
Definitely. So I think this
So it's a very
analysis,
complex situation. And geostrategically, right now, is difficult to say because what is the outcome of the conflict will ultimately determine what is the geopolitical. I gave you one possibility that had this succeeded,
right,
it would have shaped it positively. But if it remains this 50-50, neither here nor there, then strategically the Americans and the Israelis have practically lost. And in that case, the geopolitical significance would be difficult to predict at the moment. Let's see what the final outcome. Okay.
definitely, sir. I mean, this analysis would have helped a lot of individuals to actually gain a fresh perspective of how things are happening. And you very well explained the entire domino effect, sir. So, yes, certainly.
So my question to you is, life came a full circle as a young cadet in NDA to again coming back as the commandant at the National Defense Academy. How was your experience mentoring these young cadets where you once were in their shoes? Was there a little tweak here and there that, okay, it's fine if they not do it? Or was it like, no, if I was on my foot all the time, they have to be too?
Oh, the tenure as Commandant NDA was great, very satisfying. And as you said very rightly, life came a full circle because, where I started, I finished my career there. And I used to, and mind you, I am not only an ex-NDA, but I'm also father of an ex-NDA.
Yes.
So I have seen NDA in two dimensions before becoming the commandant, from two different perspectives before becoming commandant. So whenever people used to argue with me on some issues, etc., I used to tell them that don't forget that I've got a son who is also an ex-NDA, so I know what it happens. But I was equally mindful of the fact that a lot has changed between the time when I was a cadet and when I was a commandant. And in fact, I used to caution all my instructional staff. Everybody, has this, you suffer from this syndrome called my time syndrome. That, this is what used to happen in my time, so therefore that is the only correct way. So I used to be very, very conscious about reminding my staff that, look, it is not my time or your time. It is their time. It is the time of these cadets. So we have to adapt ourselves to the environment in which these cadets have been brought up and in which they are going to fight. They are not going to fight the wars that we were prepared to fight or we were trained to fight. They are going to fight new wars. So we have to look at what are the challenges that they will face 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, and let's try and prepare them for that. So that was my approach in terms of training and whole value system. And I always believe that NDA is a very unique institute. It was, in my view, way ahead of its time. Today we are still trying to integrate our forces, in terms of integrated theater commands, etc. Way back in 1945-46, we came up with an idea of a tri-services academy. And the kind of academic curriculum that the NDA has adopted right from early 50s is also way ahead of its time. Today, what the National Education Policy NEP 2020 talks about multidimensional education, skill development, learning to do things by your hands. NDA has been following this kind of academic program right since its inception. That in early 70s, it was formalized by way of recognition of that syllabus as a award of a degree by the JNU came, as a matter of fact, as a part of evolutionary growth. But the system was already in place. So it is a fantastic institute. In terms of concept, in terms of tri-services synergy, way ahead of its time. And I'm sure it will continue to do very well. The challenge that I faced was COVID.
Yes.
I took over as Commandant NDA on 1st of February 2020. And by, towards the second half of March, the whole country was preparing for the lockdown, etc. So while a lot of training establishments, including Army, or armed forces training establishments shut down and send the trainees home, we did not shut down NDA. The training in NDA continued. While we adapted ourselves, we modified ourselves, we modified the methods of conduct of training, but the training persisted. Training did not stop. And so a lot of lessons emerged from this about life and, in terms of professional management of organization, etc. We can have a separate whole discussion on that. But essentially, you need to reinvent yourself when you're faced with a challenge. One way is to get overawed by the challenge and say, oh, mar gaye. The other way is to say, no, I'm going to face this head on. And overcome. You apply yourself, you find ways and means to find wall, you learn to go over the wall, you go around the wall, but you will find a solution if you got the right attitude and you got a right team. I had a wonderful team. So without a team, there is very little that you can do. So, but we managed to continue, and I was fortunate to get an opportunity to lay the foundation for induction of girl cadets in NDA. While the physical actual induction took place, a couple of terms after I retired, but I had done all the paid work, so that was also a great opportunity of doing something new. So it was a great experience to be Commandant NDA. Very, very enriching and fulfilling.
Definitely, sir. So we'll just come on to the last question. One last question.
Sure.
Sir, if you could share any interaction with a cadet during your time at the academy as a commandant, which actually stayed with you? It could be a funny incident, it could be something that made you think twice about being there. And in the end, sir, any message that you'd like to give through our podcast?
Mm, I think lots of conversation with cadets come to mind, but more than conversation with a cadet, I want to refer to an incident or conversation interaction with an ex-NDA officer whom we had invited as a guest speaker. He was a young officer who was commissioned, an army officer was commissioned in the special forces. And in an operation, he had got wounded and he was paralyzed below the waist. But despite being paralyzed below the waist, he continued to serve in his unit, the 9 Parasef. And so while he could not undertake the physical operations, but he could undertake all the staff work in the battalion. So he manned the battalion headquarters, looked after the adjutant's job and the quartermaster's job, and that relieved 2 officers to do operational duties. And from the waist up, he was equally as fit as he was before. He could still do lots of push-ups and lots of chin-ups and all that. It is just that below the knee, below the waist, he was paralyzed. His legs were paralyzed. But remarkable spirit this officer had. And we had invited him to deliver an inspirational talk to the cadets. And I think this officer and the way he overcame his limitations and challenges was very inspiring, and that will stay with me forever.
Yes, sir. So, and one message that you'd like to give to the youngsters who are preparing for the Indian Armed Forces?
I would want to tell them that those who succeed in joining the armed forces have got an amazing career ahead of them. It's a career that is most enriching, most fulfilling. Don't look at it purely from the monetary angle, where money is also not bad these days. But of course, you can't compare with the corporate sector, and money is important. I don't discount that. But you get reasonably good money. But more than that, the quality of life, the kind of challenges that you face, the kind of responsibilities that are given on the shoulders of young officers today, whether you are an army officer, navy officer, or an air force officer, are immense. They will never ever get those kind of that kind of exposure and chances anywhere else in any other walk of life. The kind of brotherhood and the camaraderie that you enjoy in the armed forces is unparalleled. Nowhere else can you get that kind of camaraderie and your friends for life. So it's an amazing career. And those who cannot make it does not matter. There are lots of other options today. I've been dealing with a lot of young people in post-retirement, as Savni would know. I was teaching in the Rashtriya Raksha University. So there are immense possibilities today. But if you prepare yourself well, if you work hard and you have the confidence to get through, there is nothing that stops you. What, just a hint or a little guideline for SSB is what they are looking for in SSB is your potential to be leaders. Whether you can do a task or not does not matter. It is how you approach that task is what is being looked at. Okay. So, and any amount of coaching will not change your personality, through which the SSB staff cannot see through. They are so good that they will even name the coaching center that you have been. So don't focus too much on coaching. A little bit of coaching is fine, just to be familiar with what you are going to face. That's all. Don't try and mug up things, and you think that you will be able to respond in a particular manner to project a particular kind of personality. I'm sorry, you will not be able to do that, because the tests are so many, they are at such random kind of pattern that you just cannot fool the system. And three different individuals are testing you independently. So the system is fairly foolproof. Trust the system. And I'm sure you have a very, very bright career ahead of you. And all the best to all your viewers.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Savani, and thank you, Shivani.
Thank you.
And all the best to both of you and to all your viewers. Thank you.
Thank you so
Jai
much,
Hind.
sir.
So,
It
any
was great having you.
suggestions?
Suggestions?
Yes, sir.
Um, well, what Sam Altman said when he addressed the students at IIT Delhi. He said the biggest mistake that young people can do is listen to the old people.
Okay.
So don't ask me for suggestions. You guys are much wiser than all of us. You know everything. You're probably better placed today to make assessment of what's happening around you and make your choices. But I would, if something that can help you, always make your passion your business.
Yeah.
And make your business
Yes.
your passion. If you have this simple mantra, you won't find anything that is boring, that is, that's tough, or that's like a hard work kind of thing, and it'll become all interesting and fun. Okay. That's I
Thank you
think a
so
simple
much, sir.
mantra. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you for joining, sir. It was truly an honor, and it came a full circle for me too as well. I remember the first day I was so scared to even talk to you, and today I successfully conducted an interview. So it did come a full circle for me as well.
Thank you, Savni, and all the best to you and to Shivani. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jai
Have a
All
Hind.
right.
good day.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye, sir.